Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our panel on pursuing a PhD. We're starting off right now and we're still waiting for people to file in, but I'm going to give a nice introductory message. So don't worry if you're just joining, we haven't actually started yet. My name is Azalea and I'm very excited to be your moderator for today. For those of you who are tuning in to your first Millie event, big welcome. Millie is a company that is ultimately dedicated to building a community for international students around the world. And to that end, we host panels and webinars just like this one every weekend. So actually right after this panel, we have a webinar on international relations careers. So if you're also interested in that, there is still time to sign up on our website. So why not, fill your Saturday with Millie events? Anyways, when you signed up for this session, and if you indicated that you'd like to be part of our community, you'll also be getting an email after this session, and you'll also be notified about all of our upcoming events. Otherwise, you can also check out our website yourself, www.milliegroup.com, and also our Instagram at Millie_group, which is always active. Anyways, so here is how today's panel is going to look like. We have 4 superstar panelists, very excited. I have vetted them and met with them myself, so I can confirm that they're very nice and will answer all of your questions. In that regard, I have some pre-prepared questions, but as an attendee, you are 100% welcome to send in questions using the Q&A chat. You can direct your questions specifically to one of the panelists or to everybody, and I'll make sure to try my best to integrate your questions. Other than that, yeah, we're just gonna go straight into it. I'm so excited to see what our panelists have to say about the PhD process. And to start it all off, panelists, could you please tell us your name, where you're currently sitting, where you're from, but also one fun fact about yourself. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Kevin. I'm currently at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. I guess one fun fact is I like to play Frisbee in my free time.
Okay, I'm next. Hi everyone, my name is Helena and I'm currently doing a PhD at Columbia University, but I'm sitting in my home in Shanghai right now. I'm originally from Shanghai and also Vancouver. And a fun fact about myself is I'm an architect and also urban designer, urban planner, but I have the worst sense of direction. So I couldn't get to save the life of me without Google Maps. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda. I am currently doing my PhD at the University of Oxford in the UK. A fun fact about myself, I really like cats. I'm a crazy cat. I'm a crazy cat person. Anyway, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mahmoud. I'm doing a part-time PhD at Imperial College London, but I also work at JP Morgan as an AI research scientist. A fun fact about me, to be honest, not many fun facts, but I guess as part of my job, I actually work in a bank and I work on robotics. So that's I guess, a fun fact.
I think Azalea has left us for.
Never mind, it's okay. I'm here now. So I'm Alina and I'm your other moderator, just stepping up for Azalea. So let's get on with our next question. So what is your subject of study and what is your specific area of research?
So I currently study the overall field of robotics and AI, but I'm specifically interested in learning or how you can have different robots essentially learn from each other, learn very quickly from a certain environment. So one aspect of this is called transfer learning, where essentially trying to transfer knowledge from a certain set of robots to another set of robots. Along with this, I'm also interested in multi-agent systems, where if you have a group of robots, how best do you get them to work with each other, or potentially if they're on opposite teams, how can you get them to understand the other group's intentions?
And for me, I'm studying urban planning. I'm particularly interested in the role of technology in the intersection of urban technology and civic participation. So broadly relating to the current discussion of smart city, but also the idea of smart citizen and seeing the potentialities of how technology might actually enable new forms of institutions.
I'm a historian of modern China, and I specialize particularly in women's history. And I'm currently working on a thesis, which is on on female spies and the Chinese Communist Party.
For myself, my PhD focuses on applying machine learning techniques on algorithmic trading in financial markets. I specifically focus on a topic called reinforcement learning, which is trying to learn from trial and error, but applying this to the financial domain.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So moving on, where are you currently in the PhD process? For example, how many years are you in or researching, writing, etc.?
So I'm currently in my third year. So usually around this time, you have something what's known as a qualifying exam, where essentially you basically tell a committee of what you've done so far in your PhD and what you plan to do moving forward. And so then kind of the next few years after this will be like working on an actual thesis and like working specifically towards what I hope to contribute to the field.
I'm currently a first-year PhD student. So for us, for our program, the first 2 years, you mainly take classes, some of which are required, but others are electives relating to your research interest. And then by the third year, it will be kind of similar to what Kevin just talked about.
I'm currently in my fifth year. I've done my viva and I'm currently making corrections.
I am currently in my third year of study. The total length of a study for a part-time PhD is 6 to 8 years. So I'm kind of right in the middle. So far, I kind of identified the research questions I want to address and currently working on them. Afterwards, it will be more around, late stage review and then the viva.
Thank you so much. And just before we move forward, I just want to let all our participants to know that if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in our Q&A section. I will be for sure to answer them at the end of the webinar. So getting into grad school is definitely one of our biggest accomplishments when we graduate from university. So what is your academic background, like your previous degrees before you went into your PhD?
So I did my undergrad at Princeton, and I went directly into PhD after.
I did my undergrad at Cornell, and I studied architecture, and I did my master's at MIT, studying urban design, urbanism, so like more research oriented, before entering this PhD program.
I did my undergraduate in law at the University of Hong Kong. So specifically, it's a double degree. So I did one degree in politics and government, and then one degree in politics and law, and one degree in law. And then I did my master's in Chinese studies at the University of Oxford, and I'm currently doing the DPhil there as well.
For myself, my background is I studied a degree called mechatronics engineering at the University of Manchester. I graduated in 2014. I decided to actually work first. So I started working at the current company I'm in before starting my PhD like 3 years ago.
Awesome. So there are so many students that I often hear from, and they say that PhD is not really that important, and most of them will only continue to do their masters and officially like go on to pursue their jobs. So why did you pursue a PhD?
So I guess for me, it kind of happened organically. So over the summers of undergrad, I actually ended up just working in a lot of research labs. So I kind of got firsthand experience of how grad students worked in engineering. And because I was working in robotics labs, I was really able to see kind of the difference in learning about robotics in an undergrad setting and then actually working on it specifically in a higher level. And so my first experience was a group of grad students working on a team of soccer playing mini robots. So as an undergrad, I was like really interested in this, and it seemed really cool from what we learned in class in undergrad. And so this kind of motivated me to keep working in labs. And by the time that I was a junior or senior in undergrad, PhD seemed like a natural progression if I wanted to keep learning about robotics.
And for me, it's also, I guess, a quite similar experience. Like I also had quite a bit of experience working in research labs while I was in graduate school, so at MIT. So by during that time, I was able to explore through like maybe three labs, the different like interdisciplinary research related to urban studies. So it really got me into, you know, like combining the idea of applied research to real world settings in which urban planning as a field gives a lot of opportunity for researchers to do. So yeah, it was sort of also a natural progression, and I do like the process of research.
Okay, so my story is different to Kevin's and Helena's. So I did my undergraduate really thinking that I was going to be a lawyer and I was going to practice law. And I went into degree, and I really just, it wasn't for me. I found it to be extremely boring and dull, and I hated it. And I was not a good student. And anyway, I sort of just found it as sort of really boring, etc. And then so I became really interested in history, and really interested in China, and because for many different reasons. And so I took one class on legal history, and then I kind of got really interested, and then I was like, okay, if I'm not going to become a lawyer, what am I going to do? And so I was like, okay, maybe it's a good idea to study history, and so that's what I did. It's kind of an unorthodox reason, I guess, because I really had no background in history, but it just all sort of managed to happen as the stars aligned, probably. This is not a very good explanation, but that's my story.
For me, I guess I've always been interested in research. Particularly, I've always been interested in like combining different fields together. So like when I studied mechatronics, I wasn't sure if I'm interested in mechanical engineering or electrical engineering. So I decided to study a combination of both. So I've always, I was always interested in just the research aspect, focusing on one particular problem, diving deep into that, trying to look at all the work that's been done in that area. I had an offer to do a PhD straight after my undergrad, but I kind of felt like I needed to experience like the working life outside of academia for a bit. And to be honest, I'm glad I made that choice, because when I finished my undergrad, I wasn't really sure exactly where I wanted to do my research. But then I worked for a couple of years, and machine learning was becoming a trendy topic, and I realized there's a lot of applications to it in finance. I decided to pursue that, and yeah, I think mainly, it's interest really. If you're interested in the research process, just have the patience to just read a lot of papers, try out different ideas and things like that, then it's definitely something for you.
That was so insightful, and I'm pretty sure to everyone who is on this call and is considering a PhD has got their answers on why they should pursue a PhD. So moving forward, I think this question is the most beneficial for all our students. What are some factors did you consider before applying to a PhD or getting the program at your university?
So I guess for me, I had two big factors that I was considering. The first was, am I going to be joining a lab that works with exactly what I want to do, or at least covers what I exactly want to do? And the second is, how would my relationship with the mentor be, or with my supervisor be? So the first obviously is important. You're going to be working on a problem for about 5 to 7, maybe even longer years, depending on how intense your research is. And you want to basically make sure that your experience across those years is going to be pleasant, but also you're never going to be bored or dull or being forced to work on something you don't want to do. And so this is, I would say, a fear of most people, if I can generalize across PhD students. But for the most part, as long as you do some research, reach out to supervisors, you should be able to figure out, what they do in the lab. And even sometimes labs can change directions. So you can have an honest conversation with the supervisor. And then, during those conversations, you can also kind of understand a bit about how the supervisor is as a person. And I think each person wants, something different maybe from their supervisor. I am someone who enjoys more of a kind of like a relaxed environment, or someone that I can just talk to freely about my research. Whereas other people might need someone, who gives them more direct guidance. So definitely for me, picking a supervisor who was the right fit for me, as well as a lab that worked in exactly what I wanted to do, was the two most important.
And for me, it's a little different because the program I'm currently in is a boutique. It's a really boutique program. We only have 3 people per year. So, so the funding is actually provided by the university rather than a supervisor or a lab. So right now I don't have a supervisor yet, since it's only my first year. So when I was choosing the PhD program, I really was looking at the academic resources the university has, the reputation of the university in general, the general fit between my interest and what's available at the university, as well as like location and the funding package. Yeah, for me, like location actually in the end played a pretty big role because I really wanted to have a chance to live and work in New York.
So I think Kevin and Helena mentioned some of the most important factors, right? Location, money, funding, supervisor, and I think those are really important concerns for all disciplines. But for humanities in particular, you have to think about why you want a PhD, because I think with engineering, with science, with urban planning, what Helena is doing, architecture and all that, there is always that the chance of working in an industry. And working in an industry, if I'm correct, actually, please correct me if I'm wrong, is equally as appealing. It's an equally appealing destination. But for humanities students, actually, often the people go into PhDs thinking that they want to be an academic and they want to be a professor because there is really no industry alternative. And a lot of the so-called alternatives, for example, being a journalist, being a teacher, a secondary school teacher, and all that, you do not need a PhD for, right? So most people go in thinking that they want to work, be an academic, be a professor. Now, the biggest thing you need to think about when you're coming from when you're a humanities student is to be aware that there are so few academic jobs. There's so few, especially with humanities, when there's a serious lack of funding, a serious lack of opportunities, not just in Asia, but not just in the West, actually, not just in America, not just in the UK, but also in in Singapore, in Hong Kong, even in mainland China. It's incredibly difficult. So I think that's a huge concern. That's something you need to be very aware of. Now, if you're saying, okay, I just want to do a PhD for myself, then that's fine. But you have to be aware of how competitive it is to get an academic job afterwards.
For me, I think like the main factor that I thought about was the supervisor's research interests and their flexibility. I kind of needed to make sure that my supervisor is on the same lines in terms of the areas I want to research. And the second, and I think for me, the most important part is the flexibility. So I'm the kind of person, I cannot make a decision as to what I want to do. So I'm always changing my mind. And you will see some supervisors that are, just, adamant, like you have to do X, Y, and Z. This is the area you should focus on. For me, I was happy with my supervisor because he was very open to choosing whatever area I want to work on, changing my mind and things like that. That's, I think, especially in my case, because also I'm doing a part-time PhD, that was really important. The time aspect as well is really important. Unfortunately, I don't have the luxury of spending all my time doing the PhD. I have work to other stuff to do, so it was also important flexibility in terms of the time aspect. Like some weeks I'm I can focus on my PhDs. Other weeks I cannot just touch it. So that part for me was really the most important.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. So in our Q&A section, Cecilia asked, most PhD applications require you to select an advisor. So to what extent do you work with your advisor during your time of study? And I think this really aligns with our next question, which is how did you choose your supervisor, and are there any tips? So I think that will also answer Cecilia's question. So Kevin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess first talk about how to choose a supervisor and then answer your question. So in terms of choosing a supervisor, as I mentioned, it kind of goes hand in hand with how you choose like your lab. So number one is you want to make sure that your supervisor, has knowledge in or works with, whatever you're trying to do. Whether that be, either they're doing exact research on it or they have other students in the lab who are also working on it and that you can kind of join and kind of build off of. And I guess the way that I chose my supervisor, I essentially went to Duke for kind of like it was like one of those introduction to the students. I met him in person. And essentially one of my fears going into PhD was possibly having a supervisor who would put me on projects that I didn't want to do at all. And so my first conversation with my supervisor was very, very, relieving. He was just telling me like, you're going to be able to work on things that you want to do. The great thing about my lab is that it's a bit small. So we only have about 5 to 6 people, which means that my work with my supervisor is actually like very one-on-one. So I have multiple meetings with him a week per my ask actually. And so he's always kind of willing to meet and put himself out there for the students. But obviously this changes based off the size of your lab. If you're someone who prefers working kind of like in a larger lab, more students to collaborate with or kind of more resources, then you might not have, you might not have as much one-on-one time with your professor. But these are kind of, just some small trade-offs. But most of the time I would say you work very closely with your supervisor, regardless of the size of your lab. Your supervisor is going to make sure that you're kind of on the right track at times and make sure that you're kind of answering a relevant research question. Most students going in, we've done some research, but a lot of it is kind of working with other people who have said, this is a research question, you should do it. And supervisors are really there to make sure that you are working on something that whatever field you're in, this question is really going to help that field. And you're not just working on something that most people don't really, care about.
For my program, like I said earlier, we don't have to choose supervisors yet at this point. So I guess the individual students have more agency in terms of shaping their own path for the PhD career, as well as finding supervisors and collaborators along the way. So as for training, we actually have more, I guess, courses that are designed for PhD students to learn the methodologies and then come up with the research questions, and then also to share that process with your peers. So the research itself is a much more self-directed path. So it's you really have the agency and freedom to choose your supervisor and build your committee. And because our program is really small, we also don't have that many professors for this program. So it's kind of like 3 PhD students and I think 4 professors who are in the PhD planning committee. And because of the small size, there is a chance that like individual students' research interests might not necessarily align with your this group of committee we have for the program. So they really encourage students to also reach out to other departments in the university or even like other institutions in New York or elsewhere at your own freedom of choice. So I guess there's pros and cons to that because it really means that the student has to be really clear about what they want to do and to actively build relationships with people who might help their research career.
So for me, it was a relatively straightforward process. Basically, my undergraduate dissertation supervisor was a student of my current supervisor. So it was a very straightforward referral. And my supervisor's research interest is very much aligned to mine. And so that was really, really simple. But I think regarding tips, again, I think it can be a very discipline specific question, right? So if you are, say, a scientist, obviously, maybe Mahmoud and Kevin and Helena can update me, but definitely go for someone who has more funding. That's what I heard, right? You know, you want someone who can compensate you for your time, who can, have a lab with all the equipment and all that. For humanities, however, generally supervisors do not have any money. Okay, some of them might have a little bit of funding, but you are sort of expected to be able to at least in the UK, to get your own funding. But I think what is more important, really, especially with humanities, when you're working so closely with your supervisor. So, for example, I see my supervisor in the past few years when I was writing my thesis. I see her at least once a week, sometimes even twice. And she is known for being very hands-on with her students. Now, there are supervisors who are they're more laid back. They give you more room to, they give you more room to find your own topic, to sort of become inspired and all that. Because if you're a humanities student, you're kind of, your lifestyle is less rigid, right? And your thinking process is slightly different. But my supervisor is quite hands-on, and I really like that, and I think that works really well for me. Now, I know that for some people, they might not prefer working with such a hands-on supervisor, right? They want their own space, they need their own time. So definitely try to talk to existing students to get a feel of what the supervisor is like. Like some people I know, they want a hands-on supervisor because they're not very disciplined, and they need someone to really force them to be on schedule. Another thing is, don't always go for the more famous supervisor. I mean, certainly you want to be in the best school, you want to have you want to have a really famous sort of superstar supervisor. But bear in mind, a lot of the times, these really famous supervisors might have a lot of other commitments or a lot of students to deal with, and they might not necessarily have the time for you. So I think a good tip is to really think about who you're going to work well with, and to do a lot of research beforehand, before you choose your supervisor and before you contact them. It's also good to get to know them a little bit, by meeting them or by sending them an email.
Yeah, for me, I think it's very similar to what's been said so far. The way I started searching for supervisors, so I knew I wanted to stay in London, and I knew the university that I'm aiming to go for. I started off by sort of finding supervisors with similar background to mine. So my background is electrical engineering, so I started looking in that area. I kind of knew that I wanted someone who's interested in finance, so that helped me narrow down the search. When it came to actually choosing supervisor, I sent them an email, discussed the ideas I had in mind, and it was like back and forth in terms of the kind of things that we can do, etc. I think yeah. To the point about like hands-on supervisors versus like hands-off supervisors, it really depends on you as a person. Really, are you disciplined enough to be able to just define the research question you wanna do and go for it? There's pros and cons to both of them. For me, I actually prefer someone to give me freedom to explore whatever I want to do. It is great because you learn so much and you explore different areas, but at certain points you get stuck. You might get to a position where, okay, this is an interesting problem. I've tried a particular solution on it, but it's not working, and how to do that. One thing I would say is the supervisor is not the only person that you can sort of get help from or talk. There's a lot of also other students out there. There's postgraduate students there, and you learn a lot from everyone, really. I think the key aspect about the supervisor is sort of the umbrella research area. I think, yeah, it's good to have a sort of that flexibility in terms of what you want to do. But in my case, like my supervisor is famous for a couple of like different areas, so I know that I am trying to tailor my research using one of those areas. But yeah, choosing a supervisor is something to I would say to think about a lot. You have to also, like, on a human level, right? You want to make sure that this is the person you get along really well with. It's not just about the work and the research and everything. You want to make sure he's like nice and friendly, approachable, and so on. So these factors like play a big important role, I think.
Yeah, that was like incredible feedback. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope Cecilia, that has answered your question. So moving forward to more of your PhD experience and how it has been so far, what is your favorite or least favorite part of grad school, and what is something that you had not anticipated before entering grad school?
I would say probably my favorite thing about grad school is just like during this time is you're literally just tasked with trying to increase the amount of knowledge that the human race essentially has collectively come up with. And so kind of the idea of being part of this effort to essentially pursue knowledge with other academics is something that I kind of really loved about the idea of a PhD. And it keeps you going when times are tough, kind of knowing that yes, the research you're doing is for yourself and then you love doing what you're doing. But also ultimately it does have a bigger purpose in the sense that people coming after you will benefit from hopefully whatever you've discovered. On the other hand, personally, I hate writing papers. If I could, I would just love to do research, throw it on a piece of paper and kind of submit it. But presentation is very important in PhD, as well as the ability to kind of just explain precisely what you're doing, but also not get too bogged down in the details. So there's a balance in explaining your procedure, explaining your methods, and giving enough to future researchers so that they can recreate your method and build off of it, hopefully. And so that's probably my favorite and least favorite part. The part of grad school that I did not anticipate probably was, I think a lot of people already touched up on it, was just the fact that it takes a lot to come up with a question. It's not so easy as, let me just, I'm interested in this, I'll just start working on it. Obviously, there are other people who are also interested, hopefully, in what you're doing. So they've already done some X amount of work. So there's a lot of work that goes into figuring out what's already been done. So you're not just repeating research that's been done and trying to figure out, how else you can kind of fill in the gaps of uncertainty in whatever field you're in. And then along with that, there's, once you've kind of done all the work to figure out, what you need to answer, then comes all the, what's the best way to tackle this problem? And essentially the solution to tackling the problem might not be as simple or straightforward as some of the problems you might have encountered in undergrad or even in a work environment, just because as opposed to in industry, where a lot of the questions that you're trying to answer possibly other companies have done, or you kind of have a set solution that that you're going to work towards. In PhD, there might not even be a solution for the problem that you're working on. So a lot of it is really just critical thinking and trying to adapt a plan and being dynamic. But it's hard to kind of anticipate this before you get in. It's kind of, you're just introduced to it, and then you kind of just learn to go with the flow and move on from there.
For me, I guess I don't have too much feedback answering this question yet, since I'm only the first semester into the program. But so far, I after experiencing the first 4 months of the schooling, I think for me, echoing what Kevin already said, the most exciting part is to be part of a community of scholars who are really like in the collective effort of knowledge building for the human race. And being part of that and just like learning what's out there, what other people have done, is a really precious opportunity and a way to spend your time. And for me, like, it's a little unusual this year due to COVID. So I actually haven't been able to see a lot of my classmates or professors offline. So everything has been on Zoom for me so far. So that has been, I guess, a bit challenging because I feel like a lot of, like the thoughts you might have and ideas you might have are coming from like serendipitous encounters with other people when you're physically together. So I think moving everything remote online makes that process much more difficult. So like I said earlier, like on top of that, we also don't have a supervisor assigned to us yet. So I guess for a PhD student who just starting their career, like you really have to like fish for all the resources you might have and see like what's the best path moving forward under these kind of conditions.
Okay, so where do I begin? The good things about being a PhD student, I guess, well, firstly, I really like what I do. I actually like writing papers, and I like writing, research. I think, as a historian, you're not just making arguments, but you're also writing, you're also writing a story. You're creating this piece of thing you're creating something that's readable and enjoyable and fun, but also argumentative and interesting. So I really like that aspect of what I do. I love reading, learning about all these quirky stuff that's going on in the primary sources, in archival materials and all that. Like what Kevin, Helena said, the people are great. You meet some of the cleverest and weirdest and most interesting and eccentric and all these, weird people, right? And they're all, they're all a bit kind of weird, but all fun and interesting. And it's just really nice being in this community. For me, I don't really work with them because historians, and if we work alone, but it's just so nice to meet fellow people who are interested in what you're doing, and you guys are working on the same kind of period, and so having a community is really nice. Now the downside, I think, or something that I found very challenging is, firstly, you're always broke. You're permanently broke, even if you have funding. So for me, I'm very lucky to have some kind of, to have funding, but you're always kind of thinking about rent, and it's a bit annoying, right? And all your friends are sort of buying property and having kids, and you're kind of still broke, and so that kind of sucks. Another thing I found very different or unexpected is, your body kind of deteriorates a little bit, even though I'm still in my 20s, but you might have some unexpected illness, due to stress or something. So for me, I actually developed shingles in my year, and it was quite severe, and that was quite difficult. But then, you kind of have to get over it, right? And just keep working. And also, I think another thing that I found very challenging is the fact that nobody else outside of your academic bubble, nobody knows what on earth you're doing, right? So my parents, think I'm not doing any work because I'm sort of on a computer fiddling stuff every day, right? I'm sure, Helena, if you're working at home, you understand. Your mom just comes in and like, why are you seeing your friend today? It's like, what, 4 a.m., 4 p.m., you should be working. I'm like, well, I work in the afternoon. They don't understand, right? They don't understand that we need space and we need downtime, because we never take a break. We're always thinking about our research. We're always thinking about that paper we're trying to write. We're always thinking, even if we're not consciously thinking, our brain is processing the problems that we're dealing with. And you just don't stop. But then nobody outside of academia understands. They think, oh, it's 6 p.m., time for a drink. We have different time zones, and it's very frustrating sometimes. I think especially with COVID, it's very challenging, right? Because you're stuck at home, and your mom or your dad is secretly judging you. They're like, where's that income? Anyway, so there's a lot of issues that you really have to deal with, basically outsiders not knowing what you're doing. And also that you would be looking outwards and seeing all these people settling down, having a pet, having a very stable job, and you do not have that stability. And it's something that you have to come across, come into terms with yourself as well.
I think what's been said so far is like spot on, really. The only thing I would say, so from my side, the favorite part for sure is the people that you work with and the learning aspect. You're learning so much, and also like just thinking about problems and questions that are just, like they're not that, like not a normal human being, would think about, like, why are you thinking about this particular question and trying to address it. So that part I love the learning part, especially for me. I love to learn about so many different things. I'm reading even like psychology stuff now. It's quite amazing. The least favorite part for me, but I think this is specific to certain areas, is how competitive and the area of AI has become. Nowadays, you see like a lot of people just churning papers. It's all about the number of papers at top conferences. You just have to submit. I don't really particularly enjoy that. When I started my PhD, I just wanted to just, learn and just, advance the science of humanity by like a dot, but I don't really care about like publishing at the top conferences or all of that. But unfortunately, because of how competitive the area it is, it's become really challenging. And I'm also similar to Kevin. Like, I don't really like writing the paper. I just want to do the experiment, see the results, think about what happened, and that. So that's really the least favorite part for me. The part that I didn't anticipate, and this is what Amanda touched upon, is, like the PhD is not like a 9 to 5 job where after 5 you shut off. Like, I am continuously thinking about my research, like for the past 3 years, every weekend, every night. Like, I sleep, I think about stuff. So that part I didn't really think. I thought like I can make my life a bit more structured, have just a couple of hours every day to do my research and then switch off, but I can't. Like, maybe it's part of me, maybe I just can't switch off in general, but I think it's part of the research process. You're constantly thinking. It's, some people it's okay, but then at some point it just starts taking its toll on you, the person. You start just getting frustrated, getting tired. So it's something that I definitely didn't anticipate. And like another thing as well, like I think it's also been touched upon, like I finished my undergrad, I worked for a bit, and then I started my PhD. The difference I find is when you're in industry, you're kind of given the question, the task that needs to be done, and your job is to do like A, B, and C to get that thing done. In the PhD, you have to really figure out both the question and the answer. So it makes it like doubly difficult. Like, first of all, is the question I'm trying to address interesting enough? Is it like publishable? Is it all these kind of other factors? And the harder part obviously is finding the answer, right? The more the difficult question you try to address, the harder the answer. But however, having said that, one thing I found out recently, which I kind of started putting in my head, is it's not always like the most difficult, complicated answer that's the best answer, right? I usually, from what I've seen from like top researchers and top papers and things like that, it's usually the simplest ways of getting the answer that's the best. And these are the ones that make an impact. It doesn't matter if your paper is full of like 200 pages of equations and very complicated math. Like, as long as you find an answer, and if that answer is ideally the quickest and the shortest way in a simplest way possible, that to me is the best research. So something I learned a bit over time. Initially, I was just trying, looking at everyone around me. I'm like, oh my God, all this math is so complicated. How on earth am I going to be able to do that? Prove this, prove that. Then I realized it doesn't have to be like that.
Thank you so much. And moving forward to more about knowing your PhD experiences, how was your experience transitioning from your previous degree to working on a PhD level? Like your time management, independent study, stress, do you face imposter syndrome? And something related to that can also be, what is your average day like as a PhD student?
So I guess definitely, so I came from undergrad, and the time that how you spend your time in undergrad is very different from PhD, at least in the later parts of your years. So the first few years of your PhD, you end up taking classes, and it's actually a bit similar to undergrad. So you're taking classes and just trying to learn kind of like a foundation for what you want to do in terms of research in the later parts. But at the same time, you're starting to look into research questions, starting to read papers, and figure out, which kind of questions you can answer. In terms of time management, in school, obviously you're forced to go to classes, and you have a kind of set agenda every day or every day of the week. And in PhD, especially once you finish classes, you literally have 24 hours a day that no one is telling you what to do with, unless you have meetings. But for the most part, it's up to you to structure how best you work. So PhD really for me is an experiment or an experience in figuring out who you are as a person, and really trying to understand how to optimize yourself the best way that you can. And essentially, this is great, because if you're going to be working on something for yourself, then it's also best to work on your own terms. But I will say that, one of the mistakes that I did was essentially or in terms of, once I understood that I had so much time, kind of not having like a disciplined schedule still. It's good to still have discipline, even if you don't have to answer to anyone in terms of your work hours. Mostly, and this is not just for the work output, it's actually for your own stress levels. It's good to, if you have a set kind of like work routine, it's easier to be productive and get things done. I'm by nature a very chaotic person, so I love to just wake up at any time, work, and then go to bed at any time. But that's a bit harmful for your body. So as long as you're responsible and you understand that, in order to work, you need to take care of yourself first. So you still need to be a responsible adult, and usually at this point in your life, when you're doing a PhD, you end up at that level. In terms of imposter syndrome, I think that's a common issue with PhD students, but I think it's only because everyone who comes into academia really has genuine intentions on trying to improve research so far. And so everyone, I feel like, is kind of worried about if they can help research as much as other people can. And the answer is obviously yes. Like no one is naturally born good at research. You end up just it's just literally problem solving, and a lot of it is just persistence. So like the most like as Mohammed said about the papers, like with that, usually do the best are the ones that are kind of simple, and it just really takes a different way of looking at things to frame the question a different way, possibly, and answer the question. So I think a lot of people have imposter syndrome. It's not a reason to not do PhD. You can get it in other things. Just believe in yourself, and you'll be fine. Average day in the life, it once again depends on how you want to do it. For me, I work best in the morning, so trying to wake up early in the morning, get most of my work done before lunch, and then even if it's just 4 or 5 hours, I'm more productive in those 4 or 5 hours than I am for the rest of the day. And then after that, even if I need to do meetings, or as Amanda said, like sometimes you might want to go see friends like at 3 p.m. But that's fine, because you're going to be working at night when everyone else who works in the industry is just going to be relaxing. So as long as the work gets done, then you can work whatever schedule you'd like, and that's one of the advantages of PhD. It's also its own disadvantage. So just be responsible, know how well you work, and just adjust.
And for me, like I guess the biggest transition from my previous background to a PhD now is kind of my own positioning in research and solving problems. So before, I had a designer architecture background where like the research, I guess, problem is always already given to you. So it's really like you're coming from a more solutionist attitude towards a question that someone already asked you. So I guess but transitioning into the PhD, even though I'm not at the stage where I have to like formulate my research question yet, but I am taking like the methodological classes that are training us to do so. And that process is really like kind of reverting the role that I was used to being in, to now like really, like to come up with research question, you really have to survey what's available like in the literature review. So like what others already have said, what are the different like debates, opinions, and what's worth pursuing, and what's a valid research question if you're also entering this realm of knowledge building. So I think it will be like in the next at least 2-3 years at least, or moving onwards, it will continue to be, I guess, something both challenging and fun for me as a PhD student. And in terms of schedule and what a day is like for me, I think this year is still pretty unusual because I'm pretty much working the opposite clock hour as due to the time difference. So I'm taking classes mostly at nighttime, like from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. in the morning. And then my days during the day are pretty much free right now. So I get to organize my time pretty flexibly. So like others said, like we really have the agency to you know, like schedule how you want to spend your day, but still get the work done. Yeah, so what else? Time management, imposter syndrome. Yeah, imposter syndrome, I think it's a little inevitable because you're like working with such amazing and smart people who are genuinely passionate about what they do. So it's so I guess it's a really an environment where you do get, I guess, intimidated at times, but also it's constantly like super inspiring, and to just be able to immerse yourself in that environment, I think is a very worthwhile experience.
Okay, so yes, so I think Kevin and Helena definitely covered the big part. So the difference, I think the difference for me in particular is that I did my background is really in law and politics, and then going to history was a completely new sort of uncharted waters for me. I didn't know any of the historical methods. I knew very little about writing history, so it was all very, very difficult. And like Kevin, I'm a very chaotic person. Well, I was a very chaotic person, and it was, throughout the years, you really just, have to be more disciplined. And so that's definitely been a learning curve. Regarding imposter syndrome, that's going to follow you for life. I think even some of the really big names out there will have that. Unfortunately, you just have to deal with it. I remember once I was at this conference thing, and then I was talking to this really big professor. And then he was ranting about this book, and he suddenly asked, and I was kind of listening. I was like, yeah. He suddenly asked me, what are the names of the members of the Gang of Four, which is it's like a really, everyone should know this really. And and basically my mind just like turned blank, and I just sort of looked at him, and I was like, and so that was really embarrassing. And then I just felt like such an imposter. And I think that feeling, there's just no way you can avoid it. It's going to come up sooner or later. Something like this is going to happen. The best you can do is to just be your best and just deal with it. So yeah, so that's kind of my 2 cents. Mahmoud, maybe you have more to add than I do.
I think I'll start off by just that question around the imposter syndrome. So yeah, everyone will have it, and you will always have it. The one thing I learned over time is the really smart people, the people that know a lot of things, they're always very humble. And if you ask them a question about something, they will tell you, I actually don't know much about this area. So you will be surrounded by a lot of people, who are like, yeah, I'm an expert in this, I'm that, and they're very arrogant, and don't let that, scare you off. Most of these people go nowhere. They just know how to talk the talk, but in reality, once you learn more about what they're doing and everything, you start like finding holes and things like that in their work. So just get on with it, do your thing, work hard, learn from people around you, learn as much as you can. But like, to me, I always find like people who say I'm an expert in something, like no one can be an expert in anything, because the more you study, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know anything. So that's like number one. Going to the point about transitioning from my previous degree. So mine was a bit difficult because I finished my degree, I started working, and then I went back to do a PhD. The problem for me was I forgot everything. Like all the studies, all the things I studied, I just couldn't remember them. I remember like seeing, I'm now looking at something and I would be like, I got a good grade in this thing. How on earth am I not able to do this basic A, B, and C thing? And that's the difficult part, because I just forgot everything. But also, like, one piece of advice I would say is, like, in the undergrad, it's not just about the grades. Like, grades are just one component. The main thing is to actually learn what you want to learn. Like you can always find a way to get good grades. I think I was good at that. I just knew how to get good grades, but actually learning the material itself, that's the most important thing.
Amazing. So I guess this can be one of our last questions for the day. It's more on the advice for students who are considering on how to pursue a PhD, on whether should they or not. So what are you thinking of doing in the future, and how do you decide what to do after obtaining your PhD degree?
I would say PhD is a bit different in this aspect than undergrad, where if you go into undergrad, you kind of have, maybe even until your senior year to figure out what you want to do afterwards. With PhD, it's best to kind of have an idea of what you're going to be using your PhD for. Ultimately, you're spending 5 to 7 years of your life on a singular problem. So you need to understand what are the different ways that this, your experience in dealing with this problem can translate either to academia, as being a professor, assistant professor, or in industry. Like how can, the research that I've done affect companies, affect the research that other companies are doing, or, maybe the problems that, for example, like consulting companies are doing. So it's good to have not just one, it's good to have a few options of, how useful could this PhD be? Obviously, if you're going to academia, then that's just your singular intention and goal, then that's totally fine too. So for me, I definitely do not want to be an academic. So for me, it's probably best to have a few ideas of what I want to do. Specifically, I'm very interested in entrepreneurship. So it kind of goes, especially with AI and engineering in today's world. I kind of always knew that even if I, ultimately, if I didn't want to become an academic, I would still be able to, work in companies or even start companies based off research. That's kind of the, main goal right now for me. And I guess the way that you kind of decide this, just talk to people, talk to other PhD students. You can also, talk to professors. Like there are a lot of professors who move to industry and then come back to academia. So it's very flexible, once you have a PhD. And I would say also, there's not really any fear of, anyone kind of doubting your qualifications as a hard worker, as a person. For me, I think PhD is one of the hardest things to do. And if you could do it, then you're someone that's probably worth hiring in any company, just because, you've already proven that you can work hard, you can solve problems that no one else has. And, I think that experience is so valuable that, you're definitely worth an interview in any kind of company that you're interested in. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally echo what Kevin just said. I think that there are many paths towards what you do after your PhD program. And I think it's a myth that all PhD go to academia, because in fact, I know a lot of people who get their PhD degree and then, going industry, do consulting, start their own company, pursue something entrepreneurial. There's a lot of different ways that people use their degree for, especially if they want to, use that expert knowledge and to do something in the real world setting. So I think for me, I'm also more interested in entrepreneurial pursuits. And this is something that I knew before applying to the PhD program, because I feel like for our discipline, which is very interdisciplinary and it's sitting at the intersection of, policy, design, research, there's a lot of, I think, value in grounding theory and research into real world practices. And that's something that I'm passionate about, moving forward. So I think, so for me, I think knowing this was something quite important from the start, because it will affect a lot of decisions you make throughout your PhD studies. Even though I just started, but I already kind of know that what I would do and what I wouldn't do based on this initial intention. So I would advise anyone who's interested in applying to PhD programs, to kind of survey the field for the industry or department or area you're considering, what are people doing and what are some of the options available after they pursue PhD degrees. So yeah, definitely talk to a lot of people and see what's available.
So my advice is really, if you know that you're not a very if you're not a very obsessed person probably don't do a PhD, right? If you lose interest very quickly, don't do it, because it's going to be very painful for you. If I mean, you don't have to be super smart to have to finish a PhD degree, but you have to be very, very determined. You know, you have to be hardworking, determined, and you just have to be organized enough to get through all the assignments. So if you know you're not one of those, you know, if you're not particularly, you're not a bit unsure, you have many interests and you tend to give up on something if they don't really work out, then maybe, you know, really consider about what you want to do, whether you want to do a PhD. For me, I always knew I wanted to at least give academia a go. I went into my master's and PhD knowing that it's going to be very, very difficult, and I think I never realized how difficult it actually is. Right, so I think Mahmoud mentioned this, and also Kevin. There's a lot of you have to publish so many papers nowadays, right? You have to publish in the best journals. You have to. I think if you're a scientist, it's all about the citation index or whatever, the impact factor, whatever. For humanities, it's less of that, but there are just so many things you need to do to even get a chance of applying and getting through the long list. You know, it's just very difficult. So, I mean, I definitely have those plans, and I am making applications, and I do really want to be in academia. But I think nowadays, it is increasingly common for even humanities students to have a backup plan. So I do have backup plans, and I think, you know, as Helena said, it's 100% true. You don't have to be an academic with a PhD. And I think nowadays it's much more realistic to have alternative you know, careers after academia. So yeah, that's sort of my advice, just to keep an open mind about what you're going to do.
I think for me, the only thing I would add is sort of think of the PhD as like a journey to make you, you know, a good researcher, and all the set of skills, whether they're technical and all of these things, are transferable. It doesn't, like when you, like I work in industry as well. So when you work in industry, you don't necessarily have to have a PhD in the particular topic to join the team. Like my team has people with PhDs in philosophy, quantum computing, biology, a lot of different areas really. So it's a set of skills that you learn, the research process. And, you know, as Kevin said, it's like PhD is the hardest thing you can do, honestly, compared to a normal job. It's nothing, like it's a lot harder. So definitely something to pursue, but yeah, make sure you're passionate about the topic, and you can, you know, you can stay focused and complete it till the end. A lot of people I see, they just lose interest and drop. So there's no point if you get, you know, that you can lose interest at some point and just drop.
So thank you so much to all our panelists and everyone who joined us today. So as time is cut short and we have went way ahead of time, I really want to thank all our panels again for your expertise and all the advice you've given us throughout this session. I've definitely learned so much, and definitely going to consider PhD when I go to university in the future. And to all our participants who are in this call today, we have another webinar coming up in 30 minutes, which is Millie's Guide to IR Careers, International Relations Careers. So if you're interested and haven't signed up yet, please go and feel free to do so. We have some incredible panelists lined up for that, so you don't want to miss that. And if you would like to stay updated with Millie's work and what we are doing in the future, please follow us on Instagram at Millie_group. So with that said, if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to leave it in the chat. If not, thank you so much once again, and you all are free to leave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.